back to what we were talking about a minute ago, is how to get introverts to have these conversations. Is it's a lot easier when you have the 5 to 10 questions in advance. They're in Design Your Life. They're in my book. You could probably just Google them and get them for free. But yeah, I think in every path you're exploring, and this is something I get not frustrated with, but just like, I can't believe we're doing this. I have a daughter who's 17 years old, and she's so time to apply to college, right? And the world is saying to her, you have to convince the university that you know what you're passionate about and that you're going to study that, and then you're going to work in that, and then you're going to do well in that. And it's absurd, I think, to expect 17-year-olds to know what they're passionate about and know what their career path is going to be.
Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, your weekly inspiration for post-PhD career development. With me, David Mendez. Today on the show, I'm speaking with George Appling, author and self-described Passionpreneur. You'll have to tell us what that means, George. After years in high-level corporate roles, George chose to build businesses he truly loves. From a medieval festival to a summer camp and a nonprofit equine program for first responders and veterans. He's the author of Don't Settle, a Pick Your Path Guide to Intentional Work, a book that's designed to help people discover the career path that fits their own values, whether that's money, passion, independence, experimentation, or balance. What makes George such an inspiring mentor is that he intentionally created a life he loves, and now he is helping others do the same. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, George. It's really a pleasure to have you here, and happy that you had some of your time that you could dedicate for this conversation.
Thank you, David.
George, I know because I read a little bit more about you, but can you just share a little bit of what this kind of multitude of activities that you've had throughout your life, a little bit of that story of how you got to go deep into business, and then what brought you to this kind of turning point of, okay, wait, I need to now give my blood, sweat, and tears into projects that I love and that are close to my heart. And that's how I now want to spend the rest of my entrepreneurial career. Yeah, just talk a little bit more about how you navigated all of that, where you came from, what was the turning point, and how do we land today with these different projects that you're doing?
Happily. So I'll just kind of give the big arc story of my career, and then I'll talk about the pivot points. There was a big pivot point. So my career's had 3 phases. Phase 1 was strategy consulting. So that's what I did for, a big chunk of years. I was a partner at McKinsey and Company, and then a partner at a booze and company. And that was great because McKinsey paid for my MBA. So that was cool. I saw the world, learned a lot, made money. It was awesome. Phase 2 was a cell phone distribution. So I was the chief operating officer of a big company called Brightstar, which was about $5 billion in revenue back then. And then chairman and CEO of a different cell phone distribution company with about $1 billion in revenue. It was owned by private equity and sold. And that enabled phase 3, which I call the Passionpreneur phase. And that is just building companies that I love. You mentioned some of them. I'll give 30 seconds of insight into those. Sherwood Forest Fair is my medieval theme park. We only run 8 weekends in March and April. Last season, we had 177,000 patrons in 17 operating days. So we average 10,000 people a day, eating turkey legs, drinking mead, and watching jousting. So it's pretty cool. I like to joke, but it's not a joke, that I play dress up and swing swords at my friends for a living. So that's good. And then we have a summer camp for kids. We have like 500 kids over the course of July. And imagine they're just taking classes in blacksmithing, leatherworking, sword fighting, horse riding, archery, throwing pottery, painting class, making chainmail art, right? And then, there's a big storyline in Robin Hood. I've got a mead company, which is fermented honey, which is good. Audio software. It kind of keeps me a little bit in the real world. I've got a company with 181 patents, so that's fun. And then I do executive coaching as well through a big organization called Vistage. So that's kind of what I do. But there's a real big pivot point that I'd love to share. And it was when I was 36 years old, much longer ago than I wish it were, I put this note in my calendar. You remember we used to have BlackBerries on our belts? and we thought we were gunslingers because you pull it out of the little belt holster. We thought we were really cool. Your younger listeners probably won't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I put a calendar note on my 40th birthday that said stop. And what that meant was stop doing what the economy expected me to do and do what I loved. But I didn't really know what that was. I knew that I loved my job. It was great. I was making a bunch of money. I was seeing the world, working with smart people. It was really cool. But I wasn't passionate about it. So I gave myself 4 years to figure out what that was. It was only the next year that a friend of mine said that the Texas Renaissance Festival was for sale. And that was this sort of thunderclap moment where the clouds parted and the angels sang, and that was it. I knew that I wanted to own a Renaissance Festival. And I knew that because the Renaissance Festival was the only thing that I had loved my entire life other than my mother. I had returned to the one outside of Houston, Texas, which was the one closest to me. I had returned to that show like 37 years in a row, having lived 5 years in Boston and 3 years in Germany and a year in Russia and a year in Australia and a year in England. They run in October, November. I would always say goodbye to everyone for a few days because I wasn't going to lose my streak. So I absolutely love this thing. It had just never occurred to me that there was a business and had an owner. And so once I started going through that, I was like, oh, wow, that's it. So I tried to buy that show, the one outside of Houston. That didn't work. I tried to buy the one outside of Dallas called Scarborough Renaissance Festival. That fell through at the last minute. So I co-founded Sherwood Forest Fair now 16 years ago. Oh. And we're thriving and living the dream. So that was, the pivot point was very intentional. It was like, I need to figure out what I'm passionate about. I've got capabilities. I've got money in the bank. I've got a clear mind. Let's figure out what it is I'm meant to do. And then I had a thunderclap moment, which I think is pretty unusual, but that's how it happened for me.
So you gave yourself 4 years to get to, those from 36 to 40 to get ready for that pivot point. That's interesting. And what was it that brought you to do this? Because one can say, okay, things are working. Let's not change the formula, and something brought you to say, okay, today I'm going to put something on my calendar because at a certain point, I need to at least, take myself up from whatever I'm working, look at the horizon and see, am I going where I actually want to go? Or am I just following some sort of Gulf Stream that's bringing me somewhere? Was there something that at 36 made you have that reflection, a conversation, or was it just kind of an introspection thing?
Yeah, it's a good question because there was not a moment that I decided I needed to pivot. I had this explicit thought my entire career that I wanted to be free. And so I always had this thought of how much money you needed to have in the bank to then do whatever you wanted to do. So from starting at McKinsey in 1992, for the whole time, I was kind of making that plan to save a certain amount of money so that I would be free. And free might mean I keep doing what I'm doing, but I wouldn't have to. And so that was my kind of guiding feeling was I don't want to do what I have to do. I want to do what I want to do. And so I'm going to create the conditions under which I can do that. And it just so happens that I really, really enjoyed the work along the way, but it was always there. And by the time I was 36, I had a bunch of money in the bank and I had a bunch of capabilities. And I was like, okay, now it's time to put this thought I've had for 15 years into action. And that means making a decision by the time I'm 40 and making sure that what I'm spending my time on is something I'm genuinely passionate about, as opposed to just really, really liking it.
Okay, super interesting. And it's interesting because also that 4 year, it's that 4 year interval of time that you gave yourself. Of course, for you, it was because the big 4-0 was coming, and you saw that as a kind of a good moment to reassess and make changes and make decisions. But it kind of aligns with, let's say, in my case, a lot of my audience are doing PhDs now. And of course, in the States and Canada, sometimes it takes longer, but in Europe, it's 3 years plus 4 years. Ideally here, you could, if everything goes well, you could do it 4 years, but usually it's 5, 6, sometimes even more. But let's say that it's in the same ballpark, 4 or 5 years. And I'd love to revisit with you, because the fact that you put that date on the calendar with that stop sign or that word meant, at least the way I see it, something you were engaging with something, you were committing to something, but you had that time, those 4 years to little by little have conversations, make little changes, do engage in exploration, like you said. Oh, can I acquire this? Can I maybe get skills, etc.? And I'd love for my audience to think that, yes, they're starting now something new, let's say the graduate school, the PhD, etc., but that they will, if everything goes well, they'll finish within these 4 or 5 years, and there's a day after. I think what's really cool about what you said is that, and the idea I'd love to share with them is that that day 5 years from now, you start preparing it today. You start committing with it today. And what I don't want them to do, which often happens, is to have this tunnel vision. It makes them stay in that same groove until the day of, then they get their degree, and then they're like, oh, I have no network, I haven't learned anything, or I haven't learned how to talk with people outside of academia, so now I'm a bit lost. I wonder whether you can revisit those 4 years and see from that day that kind of hourglass, the grains of sun started falling in it because you kind of turned it that day. What were the different things that you did, the different actions that you took, and the different decisions that you had to make during those 4 years? Is this something you can do?
Sure. Although your question stimulated like 3 different lines of thinking.
So let's, okay, you know what? Because we're not live. If you want, we can look at the 3. I'll leave it to you to...
So one of the differences between kind of what happened to me and I think what's normal is how you uncover a passion. So for me, it was a thunderstrike moment, and I think that's rare. One of my favorite books over the last several years is Grit by Angela Duckworth, and she talks about finding your passion as, phase 1 being open-minded to the spark. And but the spark isn't normally, oh, wow, that's what I'm passionate about. It's, oh, that's really interesting. I'm excited about that. Let me dig in. And then it's a lot of work, right? Figuring out what you're passionate about tends to be a lot of work, and that's okay. So do the work to make sure that you're certain about what your passion is. So that's one line of thinking. Another is really, I guess it's just that phase 1 of being open to the spark, right? And that's exposing yourself to lots of things. If you're looking for what your passion is, and if you're doing a PhD, maybe you've already found it. But I think it's important to keep an open mind and looking for that spark all the time anyway. And the final thought I had on your question was, I think the intentionality is really important. Well, and there's a 4th thing. What I believe is that the economy will push you into a role. If you are getting your PhD, you will get pushed into a role. Like there is going to be a default. This is what you should do. It's kind of the natural conclusion. And my belief, and what I talk about in my book a lot, is I think it's wiser to explicitly choose the relationship between your passion and your work rather than let the world choose it for you. And that's, really relevant on the independent path, where on the independent path, your passion and your work are not related to each other. And for most people, that's the default. And my belief is if you intentionally, explicitly choose the independent path and you've gone through a framework, you've said, okay, my passion, my work aren't going to be the same thing, and that's okay. I think you're going to be more joyful, productive, and content with your life if you make that choice. And then finally, once I decided, I gave myself this 4-year run to figure out what I was passionate about, and I remember the words I used then is, I didn't want to do what I was supposed to do. I wanted to do what I really wanted to do. And I gave myself 4 years to figure out what that was. And so during that time frame, I did very much open my mind. I was talking to lots of people. I was exploring ideas. I thought, well, maybe I want to be a university professor. So I talked to university professors about what they like about their jobs and what they regret and what they don't like about their jobs. I thought, maybe I want to be an executive coach. And so I talked to executive coaches about, what's good, what's bad, what do they like, what do they regret. So I was very much in exploratory mode. Obviously, I thought a lot about being an entrepreneur, which is where I landed. And I would write business plans for every new idea that I came across. I'd start writing down business plans. So I was very much intentional about exploring, what does it mean that I want to do what I want to do, or I want to do what I'm passionate about? And then, I got lucky and I found out that it was the Renaissance Festival, which when I put that note in my calendar, I had no idea. But once I hit on that one, the Renaissance Festival, I'm like, oh, wow. Yep. That's it. Here we go.
That's great. Super interesting insights, super important insights. One that you just mentioned in passing is you talked with a lot of people. And because very often my audience and myself, because of our path, tell me if I'm remembering wrong from your bio data, but you were in graduate school too. You did a master's.
I did 2 masters at Harvard, business and government.
There you go. Yeah. So that we're a crowd that thinks, oh, there's this question. I'll go use my brain and find all the answers on this question. But here you are saying that for this specific endeavor of exploration, you can't just look at maps of the job market. By the way, it's changing every day, so there's no such maps. But you can't do it on your own. Conversations are key to that exploration. Is there any way to avoid them for people who are introverted? Are there tricks to have these conversations easily, or at least to reach out to people without feeling that you're being, I don't know, annoying or pushy?
It's a great question. So I think it's very rare to figure out what you're passionate about by reflection, right? I think it's really rare. Like for me, I was a very thoughtful 36-year-old. And my thought was, I want to work at my passion. Well, what is that? I don't know. And so I do think uncovering your passion, it's necessary to talk to a lot of people. And I give a book talk to university students a lot. I'm actually talking in about 6 weeks to the graduate psychology department at a big university. And so it's all master's degrees and PhD students in psychology. But one of the things that I say to young people is successful middle-aged people are more likely than you think they are to say, yes, I'll talk to you. And the truth is, if you asked 10 successful middle-aged people to have a 30-minute conversation with you, and 3 of them say yes, your life is going to be better. So just forget about the 7 that said no and embrace what you can learn about the 3 that say yes. And I tell young people a lot, you'll be surprised at how many middle-aged successful people, if you say, can I have 30 minutes of your time and talk about your career, a bunch of them are going to say yes, and you're going to get a lot of insight.
Yeah, no, for sure. So again, people watching and listening who are regular viewers or listeners, they know I keep droning on this, meet people, talk to people, go on LinkedIn, ask. If they say no, they're probably busy. If they don't answer, they're for sure busy. But people, like you said, somewhere already advanced in their career, very often they're even appreciative of, okay, I'm going to be able to think back on that time and actually share something with someone. It can be seen as flattering, but it's also kind of a present to them, to give them the chance to, in their days just filled with business and tasks, etc., reminisce and share. It's very rare that's the statistic. So thank you for
Yeah, and you asked another part of your question was, how do you do that if you're an introvert? And the truth is, it's just harder if you're an introvert, right? It's harder. And so I kind of lean into the cognitive behavioral therapy idea that, just a baby step. Take a way to talk to somebody for 5 minutes. Yeah. And the next time, find a way to talk to someone for 10 minutes. And then once you ask someone to have a 30-minute coffee, and so that you can talk to them about their career, once you do that once as an introvert, just do it one time, you're going to say to yourself, okay, I can do this. And once you tell yourself you can do it a bunch of times. Yeah. So it's just take those baby steps. One of the things I'd love to say, because it's a goofy but fun mathematical thing, it comes from Atomic Habits by James Clear. 1.0 raised to the 365th power is 1.0. 1.01, so 1% more, raised to the 365th power is 37. 37 versus 1. So when in doubt, just take one little step. Take one more step today than you did yesterday.
I love it. It's and I think it's an image that's going to resonate with our audience. Now, one thing you said, George, you mentioned that there's very often kind of a canonical, classic, typical path that follows what you do. And very often when you think of PhDs, it's becoming a professor. And it seems logical, but it's not true. And I'm going to tell you why. Something I discovered when I finished my PhD, and then I discovered through the years, taking part in career panels, etc., that it wasn't just me who didn't know this, but most of the cohorts coming out of PhDs don't know it, that 1 in 5, 1 in 10 in each cohort will have a position as a tenure track professor for many reasons. The professorships don't multiply. There's that aspect, but also people are taking longer to retire. So what I used to call alternative academic careers, what can you do with your PhD that is not being a professor? I learned with time that they're not alternative. That's actually the norm. 80 to 90% of people actually need to do either careers that are academic adjacent, so still at university, but not tenure track professorship. But most of them actually go to industry, government, nonprofit, entrepreneurship, so startups, etc. What brought me to start this podcast almost 7 years ago was to draw the curtain on this fallacy that sounds logical, that, well, you're doing a PhD, you're going to become a professor, and then if you don't, you're failing. And here, the situation actually is different. It is that if you don't start that exploration work that you mentioned early on during a PhD, keeping, talking with people, maybe start with in other labs, then in other departments, but then ideally also outside university walls, then you will think, okay, this wave is bringing me to this day where then I'll have my lab, and then you'll be disappointed because you'll see that it's very competitive and you won't be prepared. This is why I think what you said of have a lot of conversations and maybe start small, but then learn and gain a habit and gain skills, because it's also a skill you develop. Gain that skill, and then you'll first, I think you're going to be ready when the time comes. You probably will have something lined up before you get to your degree. At least you'll be ready to have these different employment conversations that are not academic, because you've already had all those conversations, because you've learned the lingo, because you've learned the plus and minus of different job descriptions of people you've talked with. Is this something that you've experienced in those 4 years, or is this something you talk about with the students that you meet?
Yeah, I do. I talk a lot about, depending on which path you choose of the 5 paths, I lay out what the next steps are. And in most of the paths, there's a certain targeted conversation element to the path. One of the things I really like is that there's a book called Design Your Life. I think it's from some Stanford professors. Yes. And they have this Design Your Life interview guide. And this might be helpful to the introverts looking for conversations, that you can have the 5 to 10 questions you're going to ask already, ready to go. Like, they can be on your phone, they can be in a piece of paper, you can memorize them. They're in my book. Like, if you're going to meet someone to explore their career, just ask them these 5 questions. And so that takes a lot of pressure off of the meeting, because you already know what you're going to ask and you're going to write down the answer, and that's it. There's no pressure to have to come up with something. So that's kind of back to what we were talking about a minute ago, is how to get introverts to have these conversations. Is it's a lot easier when you have the 5 to 10 questions in advance. They're in Design Your Life. They're in my book. You could probably just Google them and get them for free, right? It's, to do that.
Before going on with the interview, I just want to let you know that going forward in the 7th season of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, I will have a section on the Papa PhD website where deals from guests or sponsors will be featured for you, the listener of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. So head over right now, if you want to take a little pause, to papaphd.com/sponsors and find the deals section where you will find the current offers. And now back to my conversation with George Appling.
But yeah, I think in every path you're exploring, and this is something I get, not frustrated with, but just like, I can't believe we're doing this. I have a daughter who's 17 years old, and she's so time to apply to college, right? And the world is saying to her, you have to convince the university that you know what you're passionate about, and that you're going to study that, and then you're going to work in that, and then you're going to do well in that. And it's absurd, I think, to expect 17-year-olds to know what they're passionate about and know what their career path is going to be. I think it's utterly absurd. And it's because they just haven't had these conversations that we're talking about, like talking to all these different people and seeing the world and, getting inside of different industries from, an hour to 6 months, whatever it is, right? It's exposure to what's going on in the world is perforce limited when you're 17. So it's just so annoying and frustrating that now this is so crazy, David. There's a whole industry in America, at least, dedicated to teaching 17-year-olds how to pretend that they know what they're passionate about on their college applications. Yeah. It's so dumb. Whereas the way you really find that out is by exposure. The best thing you can do is what Matthew McConaughey did. Matthew McConaughey is like the only person in the world that everybody loves. And he's here in Austin. And when he was like 18, 19 years old, he spent a year in Australia and he did 6 different jobs, right? And it's in his biography, Green Lights, completely different jobs. Like, and I don't even remember what they are, but like he worked in a lawyer's office and he worked as a car mechanic and he worked on a fishing boat, and I'm just making that up, but it's just like 6 completely different things over the course of the year. And wow, I think everybody should do that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, you got to expose yourself to different elements of the world.
Yeah.
I think it's wise to do that.
Ideally, universities would allow and would integrate that in the university experience. We're not there yet. Some programs, some domains, there's more integration with industry, etc. Still, it's still not commonplace and widespread. So I've met professors who actually kind of left academia and came back, and now they know, and each year they bring their students, they have this connection with startups, etc. They do that for the students, but it's not widespread. Ideally, there should be someone, a recent guest actually proposed something like a kind of break PhD, a break in the middle where you have to go do something professional somewhere that's not in university. That could be a model, but at least fostering conversations with alumni who are in different parts of the job market. Just that would be already a huge plus for students.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. I think there are some universities like Northwestern outside of Chicago really getting into what I used to call co-op program, where you study for a semester, then you intern for a semester. Then you study for a semester, then you intern for someone else for a semester. So it's study, intern, study, intern. I think that's brilliant because it exposes you. You study for 4 years and then you go work for someone. Well, you know so much less on that path. The other example is the top business schools. So I did an MBA, and the top business schools require you to work for 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you can get accepted to them. And it's because of their belief that you will bring more to the classroom and you'll get more from the classroom if you've had that work experience. With your real world experience on the, versus just theoretical. In any case, I don't think we can here in this conversation change the academic system. But like you say, there are universities that are already trying models that have a different approach that bridges that gap between academia and industry, academia and the private. And those examples are great, and hopefully more will follow. We don't have much more time. You said at 15, you're going to have a meeting. We still have like 10 minutes. Fine.
So I think what would be interesting for us to talk about now, we've talked about this question of students in college, undergrad, graduate school, PhD, but even later on, I've heard this, even if when you're employed, you should always be networking. You should always be seeing, because not only, of course, there's the basic, maybe you have for the same job, you can have better conditions somewhere else, but also the job market is changing quite dynamically lately. And I wonder whether you have had, if you have reflected on that, on what, for example, your 17-year-old daughter, what sort of job market she will land in, which we can't really predict today because things are too fluid.
Sorry, my phone keeps ringing and it's like vibrating.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the question that I get a lot is, how will AI disrupt the job market? That's a big one, yeah. And I think the answer is a lot. And there's a lot of kind of analysis and thinking about occupations where the number of people employed is going to decrease because of AI. So that there's a lot of good thinking out there. And some of it is, a lot of the things that where decisions are based on a set of rules, the number of people needed will decrease. And so even things like law, where the first few years out of law school is a lot of research and finding the appropriate cases to reference and cutting and pasting paragraphs in contracts. And I think AI will be able to do a lot of that. And so I think the need for young lawyers is going to decrease. In fact, it already has. Okay. I've got one of my coaching clients is a senior partner in a law firm. And he says, like, they're just not really hiring people out of law school or even 2, 3, 4 years out. They're just not doing it anymore. They're using AI for that. And it's got hiccups. It needs quality control. But then even like, bookkeeping is decision-making based on a set of rules. AI can do that. Medical diagnosis, right? That's a set of rules, And in fact, there's been experimentation where you're having doctors compete with AI for diagnosing conditions and AI wins already. And so I'm certainly not an AI alarmist, but I think it's an important filter for people to go through as they're thinking about their career, because it may change the supply-demand dynamic for the skill set. For example, my 17-year-old is really excited about graphic design. And I said, look, that's cool, but AI has already dramatically reduced the need for graphic designers. And so if that's what you really want to do, you're going to have to take that into consideration and figure out how can you find a place in that world given what AI is going to do. I had a conversation with a professor friend of mine at Texas A&M about this topic. And so what I did is I actually asked ChatGPT. I said, Chat, I'm worried that AI is going to decrease the number of people needed in a whole bunch of occupations. How's that going to work out? And it wrote this vision of the future that was actually quite nice. And it said things like, there's going to be a much higher need for people in elder care, which we kind of all know that. But when you look at the numbers, it's big numbers of humans needed. And it said, we might even create in-person things that don't exist for elder care. There might be millions of jobs in talking to and entertaining and interacting and just hanging out with retired people. That could be a whole thing. And it said there's going to be a lot more energy in interactive in-person experiences. And so it's like your Renaissance Festival is going to be great if AI automates a lot of jobs, because people are still going to want to go outside and see people and drink mead and listen to music and watch jousting. Like, there's going to be more of that kind of stuff. And so, and there's a whole bunch more than that. But the vision that it painted was like, yeah, okay, I'm not afraid of it. But anyway, the bottom line is I think what AI is going to do to the number of people needed in a field that you're interested in is an important filter for you to think through.
Of course. And it does apply to scientists too, because a few years ago, there was a wave of data scientists. Now it's kind of going down. Things are changing all the time, even with people who are specialized, like graduate students or PhDs, etc. So be mindful of that, of course. Now, I wonder, in your story, your path, McKinsey, those consulting agencies meant a lot of hours of your time. You made, like you said, you made enough money to be really happy about the money you were making. And then your kind of finding what's coming next had to do with potentially acquiring something. Eventually you co-founded it, but there's a financial aspect to what you could do once you found your passion for you connected to your work. It's not the same for everyone, especially thinking people like me coming from a life sciences background. It's often building something. It's going to be building maybe, let's say, some presence, some sort of portfolio online, or just building a profile that'll be attractive to a potential employer. Is there something people can do as they are leading their scientific projects, be it PhD, postdoc, whatever, that can help them? So on one side, they're exploring, like we said, they're meeting people, they're having conversations. They have this vision of in 4 or 5 years, I want to become a professional and leverage all this expertise. But how can are there some actionable pieces of advice on how to actually kind of transform yourself? So those 4 or 5 years, that they are kind of a transformative journey where you are becoming this thing instead of saying, okay, now I know that in 5 years I need to have this pivot, and I'll just keep doing what I do, having conversations, and in 5 years I'll do this and I'll transform.
Well, I think I know what you're getting at. And it's, so there's one of the things I've really liked about, one of the things I found about my book that I didn't expect was that a lot of people are on the balance path. And a balance path meaning you're in the real world, you're working a job, hopefully it's cool. But what you're doing is you're kind of building some financial security and some capabilities and some network and some brand so that when you switch 5, 10, 15 years later to marrying your work and your passion, your probability of success is higher. And one of the things I found that I didn't expect was a lot of people are doing that and they felt guilty because they weren't following their passion right away. And when I gave them the language of the balance path, it took their guilt away. And so the segue to your question is that one of the recommendations on the balance path is never stop fiddling with potential passion projects, right? So if you're on the balance path, which is I'm going to build some financial security, some capabilities, some networks and brand, and I'm going to switch to following my heart, never stop along that path. That path might be 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Keep messing around with passion projects and writing passion business plans and talking to people in the sector that your passion lies in and exploring ideas and creating prototypes. And maybe you're serving as an advisor on a startup board in the sector that you're passionate about. So always have your finger in the passion world, even when you're doing something in the quote unquote real world. And so I think that kind of translates to what you're saying is you're doing your PhD for 4 or 5 years. I think you should have your finger in something else.
Yeah.
And that can take a lot of different forms.
And actually, that's great advice in a way that doesn't burn you out, but at least keep that connection. One word you mentioned just in passing, which is branding. And now I know that I was kind of walking around this expression because people don't like it a lot, especially in the academic space, personal branding. I wonder whether this is something you have reflected about or people have asked you questions about, because for some audiences, they balk at the expression. But I do think that in today's world, personal branding or time invested in building a brand is important because people can find you in different ways on different platforms. And the way to stand out is to have a breadcrumb trail that people can follow and then find, oh, this is who this person is. Oh, this is what interests them. Here are their strengths. This is how they're creative. Have you reflected on that? Have you been asked questions on that? And do you have something you can share with the audience?
Sure. I think the phrase personal branding being a turnoff is really just about the words.
Yes.
Because the concepts underneath it are a must-have. Like if there are certain people in the world who you want to know, who you want them to know what you do, right? So for me, for example, I want people who book speakers at universities to know what I do. And to make that happen is a marketing exercise. You may not like the word, but if there are, 5,000 Americans or Europeans or 10,000 or 20,000, and they're booking speakers to talk about career development, I want them to know who I am. Well, how do I do that? It's a part of that is personal marketing. It's posting on LinkedIn, it's doing podcasts, it's writing books, it's giving talks. The activities you have to do to make sure the people that you want to know what you're doing know that it is marketing. You may not like the words, but it is. It's like when I was young and in college, there was a big turnoff to the word sales.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to say, I sell something. And it's really just the word. Because the truth is, as you're in the world, you're trying to convince people to do things. And you may be trying to convince people to do things that are very much in their own best interest, right? It may be very altruistic, but you're still trying to convince people to do things, which in some sense is selling.
Persuasion is a word that I've heard that actually passes, people like it.
There you go. I like that. I like that. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Yeah, persuasion. Still no one likes the word sales.
No, that's it. And I remember actually at the end of my undergrad feeling exactly that, like, wow, and hearing about people who left and are now selling something and being like, oh no, all these years for that.
Yeah.
But like you said, the connotation is so much wider. And it's just, I think we need to keep having these conversations and sharing the meaning versus just the words, and people will understand. So personal branding, having some sort of presence online is important today, in your opinion, and is key to being discovered and to being known, I guess, even just that, known by people who might eventually have a great conversation with you, that'll teach you something or be pivotal, or eventually hire you. I've seen this happen, of people's presence on LinkedIn leading to a first position just because of what they shared and how they shared it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I just got engaged. I mentioned earlier too. I'm talking to the graduate psychology students at a university in Pennsylvania. The professor that is bringing me in just found me online. I don't know this person. I've never even heard of it. It's the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Okay. And I wasn't familiar with it. I looked it up. It's great. And yeah, she found me online.
Amazing. There we go.
So
I think for the person watching or the person listening, be out there. First, maybe if you're introverted, be out there listening and taking part in groups or conversations. Let's say on LinkedIn, there's groups in your domain. Be in there. First, you just crawling and seeing what's happening, then respond, and eventually find a way to actually put your opinion out there, talk about the things that interest you, because it makes you visible, and it makes getting those interesting conversations much easier in a certain way, because you can be found. You don't just have to be finding.
I'd love to do a minute on defining the 5 paths, because I think it's, even for PhDs,
amazing. So we can finish on the 5 paths. Then I'll ask you how people can reach out to you, and then we close there. Finishing on the 5 paths is going to be a great closer for our conversation.
Perfect. So I think, David, even for people doing PhDs, it's really anyone. Knowing what path you're on is valuable. And so the path is the way your passion and your work relate to one another. And I have 5 different paths. One is passion now. And so on that path, your passion and your work are the same thing. And in some cases, that is kind of the end goal, but it doesn't have to be now. There's the independent path, which is where your passion and your work don't have anything to do with each other. And I think that's kind of the default path, which I don't like. But if it's the path you choose, then I think you'll be happier with it. There's the experiment path, which tends to be for people who don't know what their passion is. That's the, go expose yourself to different. Yeah, go try a bunch of different stuff. That's the experiment path. There's the money path, right? And we all know the people who they just weren't going to be able to breathe until they had financial security. And so there's the go after money path. And then there's the balance path, which is you're doing a regular career with an eye toward maximizing the probability of success of switching to the passion path later. So you're intentionally building, capabilities, financial security, brand, network. You're intentionally building things that increase your probability of success of monetizing a passion later in life. That's the balance path. And so the beauty of the framework, I think, is if you make that decision, you'll kind of know where you are. And in the book, each of the 5 paths has a chapter, and it lays out a work plan. Like, here are the 5 next steps. And it kind of gives you a go forward plan, which is, I think, why the book is succeeding.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I think I always appreciate when a book doesn't stay at the mindset side of things and actually brings blueprints of things and actions to follow and homework sometimes, etc., because that makes it real, and that actually allows us to see that we are moving towards something based on the exercises that we're following. I really, really appreciate it. George, we're reaching the end of the conversation, and I really appreciate your energy. I also appreciate the fact that these are questions that you currently talk with students about, even though they're not all graduate students, and it showed during the conversation. And also, I really appreciate the fact that you did your studies, you went into business in those first years of your life, and then there was that pivot moment, but you do bring all that knowledge of what's the world outside university. You know it very well. And that makes, to me, at least during the conversation, but I think also to our audience, the feeling I get is it's not, how can I say, it's not a dark and foggy place where people are all going after money, for example, et cetera, and selling and schmoozing. There's place there for passion, for intellect, and for exploration, and for growing. And I think that's also one thing that I understand and that I found inspiring in the journey, the arc that you showed is, here you are after these different chapters of your life and you still are growing, you still want to grow. So if you're still growing and wanting to grow, all of us who are earlier on that journey, we can also still grow. And I really appreciate that. If people want to reach out to you to find your book, your content, where can they find it, George?
Or the best place is probably my website, georgeappling.com. There are links there to get the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Target. Okay. There's also links to my social media and LinkedIn. So I would just try georgeappling.com.
Wonderful. And I will put that URL and the other ones in the show notes of the episode. George, this was a pleasure. I hope we keep in touch, and I wish you all the best for the book, but also for all that you're bringing to different audiences out there, especially the students that are close to my heart.
It was a pleasure, David.
Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD is produced by me, David Mendez. If you enjoy the show and want more of my work, please support the show on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Papa PhD and choose a tier. And if you just want to buy me a coffee, you can easily do it at buymeacoffee.com/Papa PhD. I'm David Mendez. See you soon.